So let's give it a start. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this third event of our webinar Seniors of Climate Change and Health, organized by the European chapter of the ISEE, the International Society of Environmental Epidemiology. And today, this session is going to be about communication tools. Myself, I'm Ana Maria Vicedo. I'm an environmental epidemiologist working at the Institute of Social and Preventive Medicine of the University of Bern. And today I'm gonna just give you the welcome, and then I will hand it to our chair, that is gonna be Aina Roca-Barcelo. She's a PhD candidate in the Imperial College in London. So just briefly to give you a couple of housekeeping instructions. We will have today 3 wonderful presentations. Hopefully Aina will explain why is that. And each presentation is going to be around 15 minutes. And at the end, we will have a Q&A session. The idea is that all of you can post your questions in the chat, or if we see that there are not so many, you can also say it with your microphone on. But during the event, just keep in mind that please keep your microphones and cameras off. And remember that this event will be recorded, and we will post the video in our website of the ISEE. You will receive information regarding this. So just a final point, I just want to give you a little bit information about the work that we are doing in the ISEE. And you can also have a look to this website where we put all the information on events, courses, and all other activities around climate change and other environmental and health topics. So with that, I close my let's say contribution. I hand over to Aina.
Hello, everyone. Anna, could you go back to the first slide so we can see the speakers, so everyone can see it?
Yeah.
So yeah, just following on to what Anna said, first of all, welcome to everyone. These will be our last webinar of this series. So throughout these 3 series, for those that have joined more than one, we've gone through a whole journey on how can we, make our climate research more visible, and how can we keep up to date. So we've gone through new data sources. That was our first seminar. The second one was on new methods and new tools that we can use to do research. And now we've reached the very end, where we're trying to identify better ways of communicating the research that we do, which is a really important and sometimes forgotten step of the process, which we spend a lot of time doing the actual research, gathering the data, analyzing it, but then we miss that opportunity of actually sharing it with the world, which is the starting point of why we were doing it to start with. So for that, we've gathered a really amazing panel of speakers. You can see here on the right the presentations and their names. I'm gonna just quickly say that sadly, Professor James Cheshire might not be able to join today. We're gonna move his presentation at the very end, see if he can make it. But otherwise, don't worry, he's gonna record his presentation, and we're gonna make it available to all of you after the event. So if he cannot make it, don't worry, it'll be available for everyone. So with that, the way I wanted to mention as well, the way we organize this is we wanted to highlight different ways that we can do communication. So that's why we use these sort of repetition of power of maps, power of multimedia, power of words, to try to highlight that there is not a one unique way of doing science communication, but instead we should be adapting the communication tools that we have to the audience that we want to reach. And hopefully this is going to be visible through the presentations that we have lined up for you. So without further ado, I want to introduce you Ayesha, Tandon, a science journalist, and Tom Prater, a senior multimedia producer at Carbon Brief. For those that don't know Carbon Brief, this is a UK-based website that uses different multimedia tools and visualization to try to spread knowledge about climate science, energy policy to a wide broad of audience, and try to improve the understanding that we have of climate science. So yes, the floor is yours. Feel free to share your screen, and I think if you stop sharing yeah.
Great, thanks. I'll just share my screen then. All right, awesome. So thank you. That was a fantastic introduction. I actually don't have a huge amount to add. Just to say hi, I'm Ayesha, and yes, I'm the science journalist at Carbon Brief. So I have a background in science, sort of physics and chemistry, and I joined Carbon Brief as their science journalist about a year and a half ago.
Yeah, and hi, I'm Tom Prater. I'm the senior multimedia producer at Carbon Brief. I have a background in digital journalism and art and design, and I've been with Carbon Brief for about 4 years now.
Awesome. So we've already had a pretty good overview actually of what Carbon Brief does, but just to give you a little bit more detail. So as has already been mentioned, we're a UK-based website. We were founded in 2011, I think. And we have, in terms of our editorial slant, we have 4 main teams. So we have the climate science team, that's the team that I work in. We have our energy and policy team, and those are the 2 main teams that have been around sort of since Carbon Brief was founded. And then more recently, we got 2 new teams we've started expanding. So we've got our food, land and biodiversity team. And then we've got a China team. So as we all know, China is quite a big global emitter. So we have one team specifically looking at emissions from China. But then also we have our fantastic multimedia and digital team, which is what Tom heads up. So Tom's just going to talk a bit about the different types of content that Carbon Brief produces.
Yeah, so I head the multimedia team, and we work across all like 4 departments of our different strands of our coverage. There's 2 people that work in the multimedia team, and we all work with the writers on, you can see the types of content. So that we'll do like in-depth explainers on climate science and policy. We'll produce some of our own analysis, and that will require various like data visualizations that we'll work on. We have a series of interactives where we will produce longer form content, where we're less restricted by the kind of typical format of a web page, and we can design and curate the content, you know, specific to the needs of the piece. We also have a portfolio of newsletters. We have a daily briefing, which is a 24-hour snapshot of climate change news in the media, and a China and a food and land-specific newsletters. And then we also have these media reaction pieces as well. So responding to how the global news has like responded to a particular event, and you know, have fact-checked that sometimes as well.
Awesome. So as Tom mentioned, we have a ton of different types of content, and so we don't have time to go through all of them today. So I thought as the science journalist, I would just hone in on my bread and butter, what I do on the day-to-day, which is my sort of standard science write-up. So as I'm sure most of you know, but just in case for those of you who don't, the main way that scientists communicate their work to the scientific community, to the general public, tends to be by publishing research. And as a science journalist, a lot of what I do is reading through other scientists' research, seeing what's interesting, keeping up to date with the most important developments in climate science. And so every day, every morning, I get emails from journals like Nature and Scientific Advances and PNAS, all those big ones, listing the research that's coming out in the next 2 or 3 days. And so what I do on a daily basis is I go through and I assess how interesting or important this new research is. And sometimes if I find a paper that's really interesting and my editors agree with me that it is really interesting, we will write a piece on it. And that is my kind of standard science write-up. So this screenshot on the left is an example of a paper that I read and I instantly thought, yes, absolutely, really interesting topic, both interesting to me and hopefully interesting to the public. And so I just want to talk very quickly through my process of taking this kind of science paper and turning it into a story that I would actually publish on our website. So on the right is just kind of a quick snapshot of what you need, or what I consider I need to write a good story. So the title and the summary are, in my opinion, some of the most important things. So the title is obviously the first words that people are going to see on the page. And then the summary is sort of a 5 or 6 paragraph snapshot of what's important in the research. So obviously that's a call I have to make. I will decide on what I think is important in that paper. And the idea is that we know that not everybody will read past that summary. So hopefully that summary is going to be really intriguing and it's going to encourage people to read further. But if not, that should tell them everything that they really need to know about this research in sort of a very easy minute-long read, just 5 or 6 paragraphs. Then the rest of the piece is going to follow sort of fairly standard introduction, methods, conclusion, sort of what you would expect. And then you get to do the fun bits after you've sort of thought through that, the basic wordy bits. You get to do what I consider more interesting, which is look at images and quotes. So images, again, really important, is the hero image that goes at the top of the piece. So just sort of a case study, an example, if you like, the India heatwave that I'm sure a lot of us know about has really been unprecedented, and it's been causing a lot of suffering for people living in, say, India and Pakistan at the moment, really, really high temperatures. And a lot of the news coverage has been children happily playing in fountains or people outside in parks enjoying themselves. It's not been representative of the suffering that the heat wave is causing. So we have to be really careful with the hero image that we choose, that it's actually representing the message of the piece. And then inline images as well, so within the body of the text, and then graphics, which I'm not going to actually talk about. I'm going to let Tom talk about that more. But if there's data that we think would be interesting to visualize from the piece, or a chart that they've done for the paper that we think we could sort of make a bit snazzier, then we'll do that. And then quotes. So I usually get a quote from the author, one of the authors of the paper, and then from other scientists as well, asking them what they think is important in the paper, how it's relevant to society, how robust the methods are. And this I consider very important because it kind of provides the context, the background around why this study is interesting. So it may be stuff that wouldn't be included in the paper itself, but that our readers might find really interesting. And for this, I do really try to emphasize diversity. So looking at the global north and the global south, men and women, early career and older, more established researchers, to get a broad range of voices in there. So this is what we came up with for that study that I showed you on the previous slide. So the title, Eradicating Extreme Poverty Would Raise Global Emissions by Less than 1%. So we kind of pulled that out as what we considered the main finding. And then on the left is a graphic that Joe made. So Joe works under Tom in the multimedia team. And he made this really sort of snazzy graphic that I think captured some of the main points of that piece really well in kind of a very engaging way. So I should mention that Carbon Brief is sort of long form journalism. So where, say, The Guardian or The Independent covered this paper, they did maybe 500 words, and they tend to publish quite a few articles each day. We take a bit more time, we go a bit slower, and we tend to write longer pieces. So this article ended up being about 1700 words, I think. And then just quickly to round it off, one of the most important bits as well is the promotion. So this piece in particular, one of the reasons I chose this one to show you is because it did really well on social media. So we used that graphic that Joe produced as the sort of main graphic on social media. And then I also went and did a Twitter thread, which also did quite well, very well. I think this was the best Twitter thread I've done for a piece. And I think a huge reason for that is because there were so many engaging graphics in that article, as well as the one that Joe produced. The paper itself just had such clear and engaging graphics. Each one told its own story, made its own point, and it made it very easy for me to sort of chunk up the paper into all of these little tweets that I think just made a very compelling story, a very compelling narrative. So that's all from me, and I'm going to hand over to Tom now to talk a bit more about the different types of graphics and visualizations that we do.
Cool, thanks, Ayesha. Yeah, so picking up on data visualization, it's obviously like a very important part of our visual language, and we tend to produce the graphics for many of our pieces. This is an example of an analysis that our policy editor, Simon Evans, produced last year, looking at the historical emissions of each country over the period of 1850 to 2021. And after we had crunched the numbers, we managed to produce this, what's called in the industry kind of a bar chart race, where it's ranking the countries over that time period. And this was a very popular post. We led the promotion of the article with this visualization. And it's something that we think about a lot, is thinking about how we can produce these animations that show the data over a period of time and sort of save the big reveal towards the end, And it's often a balance of trying to find both the holding on to the big reveal, but also ensuring that it's engaging enough from the start, and it's short enough that it would sort of retain the attention of the person looking at it. And yeah, so this was distributed obviously through Twitter, through Instagram, on YouTube, and it's done very well on all of those various platforms and had different types of engagement. This was also published by The Guardian when the piece went live, and they embedded this visualization at the top of their piece as well. So it enabled us to reach a very much wider audience than we would have typically done if we had just gone with a straight write-up. And Ayesha, if you go to the next one, just another example of a data visualization that we've produced. So this was an interactive that we produced in 2019. Our science writer or climate correspondent Daisy Dunn wrote this piece, looking at the impacts of meat and dairy. And this was what we are sort of describing as an interactive, where we're displaying graphics and visuals in a slightly more interactive way, enabling the user to engage with the data in different ways. And we produced this feature, and then the example on the right, how we treated it for social media. Don't know if that plays, Ayesha, that example, it might link you out.
Yeah, it's taking me to Twitter.
Okay, so this is one of the charts actually in the piece, which was just a flat static graphic, but for social media we thought it would be more engaging to actually animate the data itself. So we just produced this very simple animation of the camera just panning up, and the values of each type of food is animating out as it goes up, and just to really emphasize that kind of big reveal at the end, the impact that beef has compared to all the different food types. And again, that struck a lot of engagement and conversation on Twitter, much more than had we just done a flat graphic, or if we had just led with the hero image of the piece. So it's often thinking about what other visual assets there are in the piece that we can do specifically for the different social media platforms, knowing the kind of follower base that we have on those different platforms. So those are a couple of examples of data visualization that we produce. If you go to the next slide, maps are another major key tool that we use in our reporting. This one is a recurring annual piece that we update, so it's kind of an evergreen topic, really. It's mapping where extreme weather events are happening around the world, where there's been an attribution study, and it's a piece done by our science editor Robert McSweeney, and each year he'll go through the papers and add this to this sort of growing data set. And so it's a data set that we are building over time. And this piece I wanted to pull out in particular because the article itself leads with this interactive map. So you can zoom in, you can filter the map depending on the type of weather event, or whether there was or not any influence found with climate change. And we've essentially built the article around this idea of the map, like the kicker leads with mapped. And so the idea is that it's kind of a resource for people to use. And it's actually one of our most popular articles. It continues to be in our sort of top 10 most viewed articles every year, because of its evergreen topic and relevance. And there's another map example on the next one. So this is a slightly different treatment. So rather than sort of building our own database, this is working with NOAA's data set of proxy studies, of which there are over 10,000 different types of studies that are in their database. But I don't think it's even live anymore, but they had a map on their website that sort of displayed this data, but it was very user unfriendly, and it was very slow to load. whilst that data did exist there, we thought it was essential that we kind of build our own version of this map and let the reader, interact and explore the data for themselves. So this map sits within an explainer about proxy data, and the user is then encouraged to click around. Each of those markers can be clicked on, and it will link you to the study. And it helps sort of build a picture of sort of where the studies are being conducted and recorded. And then lastly, there's just a couple of other types of multimedia that we produce. So Carbon Brief are known for their very in-depth, long explainers and Q&As. So I think this hydrogen explainer it could have been up to about 20,000 words or so. So it's a big piece that's going to take over an hour to read. And to go with that, we decided to produce quite a relatively simple graphic, but just to kind of condense a lot of the information that is being covered in the explainer. And it means that then we have a kind of a custom visual asset that we can then use to promote the piece on social media. So this was animated for social media as well. And it just gives you a quick takeaway, and something that can also be shared and distributed around classrooms as well as social media. So yeah, we'll produce these infographics. I think there's one more. So yeah, this example, it looks more at the chemical process of this one in particular, ocean acidification. So we had produced an interactive looking at the Great Barrier Reef in particular, but we thought it was necessary to actually explain the chemical process of what ocean acidification is. And so this is just a quick 90-second video, and it sat within the feature itself, but it also is hosted on YouTube. And whilst the piece was published in, I think, like 2018, the video continues to surface up in YouTube search results, and we can see that people are still going to it in their thousands each year as the kind of go-to for that explanation. So, there are ways in which we are trying to produce these different multimedia assets that can then take a life on their own, sort of after the piece has been promoted and published. And I think that's it for me. That's just a quick snapshot of some of the different types of media that we produce.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Thanks. That was super interesting, and I'm sure there's going to be plenty of questions at the end. But I think for now we move to the next speaker. Aina Stauffer, who is a Deputy Director and Strategic Lead at Health and Environment Alliance, HEAL. She'll be talking about the importance of including health in our climate negotiations, both in adaptation and mitigation, and how this is not always the case. And what can we do from a communication perspective to try to bring that discussion on the table? So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation and allowing me the opportunity to speak to you this afternoon and have this exchange on science to policy communication. And I think I can tie in neatly to the first presentation, which was super interesting. I'll be focusing on the power of words, but also very much linking to how do we visualize the co-benefits message on climate change and health. And I'll be giving you some examples of HEAL's work and other organizations' work from very much our 2 decades of science to policy communication. So yes, let me see if I click. This works, yes. A brief introduction on HEAL. We're an alliance of over 90 member organizations from 28 countries in the European region, from very much the diverse health sector. And we're working for a better health through a healthy environment. And that means working across the range of environment and climate factors that can affect our health. So climate change, energy, clean air issues, but also very much chemicals and pesticides. As I think we all, when we look at climate change or any of these issues, we realize how much they're actually interlinked. And when we think about the co-benefits message and co-benefits communication, the first point I wanted to make is that actually there is an incredible amount of evidence out there. So it's not the problem that we don't have the data. And one of the institutions to communicate on this is obviously the Lancet Countdown, tracking progress on health and climate change across the 40 indicators. And as you know, they have published assessments, annual assessments now from their work. And the co-benefits analysis is a key factor in this. And they have also produced various visuals and infographics to go with that, and I've included here some from last year. So each year they also focus on specific messaging. One year it was focused on children and the impacts of climate change on children. Another year it was focused on vulnerabilities to heat, where I found a very important message that Europe, is the most vulnerable globally when it comes to heat-related health impacts. They also have focused on energy questions specifically, and for example, had these have this messaging that healers use very much, and that speaking about the impacts, the health impacts from coal power generation, and that actually that a coal phase out is a crucial, no regrets public health intervention. So that's one evidence side that can inform the work, and obviously this also includes ISEE, the ISEE network, and the studies that are coming out as part of that. The World Health Organization has also been really important to bring out the health and climate message. For the COP26 last year, they published a special report, a report that's called the Health Argument for Climate Action, which included 10 recommendations on what policymakers, governments need to do to really set us on track of limiting global warming to not more than 1.5 degrees, and really keeping with the Paris Agreement. And we took this their 10 recommendations as a prompt to share them then with our network on social media. So for the COP, or during the COP, for each day we had dedicated social media focusing on one of the recommendations under a hashtag or what the doctor ordered. So we shared each of the messages and a visual with that on social media. So, many health organizations have been active on furthering the co-benefits message, and we have produced a range of materials. For example, an infographic here that focused on the overall message that we've been receiving from the scientists, that climate change is the greatest threat to public health of the century, but tackling it is also the biggest public health opportunity. And so we highlighted there, who is particularly at risk from climate change, what are the direct and indirect health impacts, and then what needs to happen in each of the key sectors, agriculture, building, industry, and how can actually action for climate bring about the further health impacts. So this infographic is available in 5 languages. We're hoping to actually translate more. We also did an infographic specifically on walking and cycling, and how this is good both for your both for climate, but even better for your health. And again, looking to to further this also in other languages, because I think the science is often complex, and really seeing how we as individuals or organizations can break this down for policymakers and really bring to them this positive message to then inform the various policy deliberations that are taking place. We've also teamed up with other organizations to produce dedicated materials for specific groups. Here is a visual, but then we also had social media shareables that talk specifically about pregnancy and climate change and what needs to happen to better protect pregnant women. This is an infographic materials we published together with FIGO, the international network of obstetricians and gynecologists. And again, this is available in many languages for people to then use further. And when it comes to communicating on co-benefits, I also wanted to mention the Global Climate and Health Alliance, which is a non-governmental alliance bringing together health organization experts from across the globe. It was formed in Durban in 2011, and to really focus specifically on health and climate change, and advance and advocate for higher ambition and mitigation. GCHA last year, they have done a thorough analysis and produced various materials on the national determined contribution. So each of the national climate ambition, as part of the Paris Climate Agreement implementation, and they have produced these scorecards, and they're available on the website for anyone to use, where they rank what governments have been doing or what they have committed to do, and this also includes assessing how much the co-benefits, health co-benefits, actually feature and are a driver for the policies that have been set up. And unfortunately, you see here I put you the European Union, that unfortunately they didn't score very high, including also not very high on when it comes to recognizing the health co-benefits and prioritizing them. Another activity and connected to that is a letter that was actually signed by an incredible amount of organizations and individuals, over 600 organizations representing over 46 million health workers, together with over 3,400 individuals from 102 different countries, issuing a healthy climate prescription, which was an urgent call for climate action from the health community. Initially presented to COP26, but it's very much something that has not lost the urgency, and something that we have been will be sorry, I have a background noise, that we will continue to use in our work in the next months, and it's available in various languages as well, and very much makes the case that we need to step up in order to to limit global heating, but also very much with the stepping up we can reap important health benefits.
So the deadline base is given us is 4 p.m. tomorrow.
So what is the actual policy context we're talking about? Or where can we insert the science and the evidence that is emerging on health co-benefits? And at the EU level, this is the European Green Deal as the framework, the policy framework, in order for the EU to reach climate neutrality by 2050. But not only climate neutrality, the European Green Deal is really a holistic approach, because there is very much the understanding that it's all linked. You cannot just consider the climate neutrality goal as its own goal, but we need to achieve the transformation in, for example, the agricultural sector. We need to achieve it in the building sector. We need to achieve it in transport. We need to also in that process protect biodiversity, as we're actually faced with, if you want, these multiple crises of a climate crisis, a biodiversity crisis, but also very much a health crisis. And this is what the EU Green Deal very much aims to do. And as part of these of the implementation, it's not it was agreed in December 2019, so before the COVID pandemic, and now before the war in Ukraine, but it's still very much a needed framework and a relevant framework to achieve this, and we're still in the course of its implementation. And for example, for climate, there are discussions or deliberations taking place right now, as the EU has upped its climate goal for 2030 to achieving emissions reductions of at least 55%. And there's a huge legislative package called Fit for 55. When we actually think 55% is not enough. It's not enough to deal with the urgency that we're facing. It needs to be at least 65%. But deliberations on this are ongoing with the European decision makers, and this is very much where the highlighting of the benefits that we would see from from a more ambitious mitigation action is something that would be very important to make, and this is something that HEAL is doing, but it's very much an ongoing opportunity also for scientists to come in and share the evidence that is available. Now, with that, of course, as we all know, the world has changed very much in the past weeks with the war in Ukraine, and that has also brought to the forefront again, those multiple crises, how issues are interlinked, and it's very much shown us that fossil fuels are, they're not only driving climate change, they're not only harming our health, but they're also fueling wars. And as you know, there's very much a policy drive to become independent of Russian fossil fuel imports, with an upcoming plan called Repower EU. And we think this needs to actually go beyond thinking about fossil fuel independence from Russia, but actually phasing out fossil fuels altogether, which is also something that the World Health Organization recommended in their special report to COP, which I showed earlier. With these, I said it's all interlinked. This is something that the war has shown us, because as you know, we also very much have discussions about food security connected to energy security, and again, this is where the European Green Deal as a policy framework and approach is of utmost importance for us to achieve greater resilience, and also helping to climate proof our agricultural system, so that we can be sure that we can continue to have the food system that we need, and the food systems that are also healthier for us overall, and further sustainability and change diets. So in all of this discussion, there is very much the scope to be bringing in health co-benefits, and also highlighting that health considerations should be central when we talk about all these steps and measures that need to happen for the climate. As yes, we have the need to ensure that, and we have these many measures. It's very clear from the science what the measures are that we need to be taking to protect both our climate and prevent disease. So I wanted to end with some recommendations, or food for the further discussion, and that is very much a need to strengthen, or actually an invitation for a strengthened working together between the scientists and non-governmental health organizations in this science to policy communication. I think each, if you want, communities have unique strengths that we can bring together in order to find a greater recognition with both the policymakers, but also with the public. Yes, and what would also be very much desirable, and what many people are working on, is to build the capacity in the health sector and the expertise for speaking out, so that the climate emergency is really understood as a health emergency. And that needs to be, tackled accordingly. It's very important that there is targeted communications. This is also something that Ayesha and Tom mentioned before. This means defining your audience, thinking about your messaging beforehand, and then in the policy context, it's really important to consider what are the policy junctures, what are the key policy moments, because otherwise you may have a very good piece of information, a very good study, but if the policymaker's mind is focused on something completely different, unfortunately, you'll have less chances of being heard with your message, and it may get lost in all the information that is out there. What we found really relevant in the European context is to have information available in multiple languages, to make sure that it's heard by your target audiences. Breaking it down as much as possible. So thinking about the national context, or thinking about the city context, also that you're bringing your evidence to. Visualization is a key thing. I mentioned, it's it's the complexity of what we're looking at, the complexity of the science. So visualize that and really share the positive messaging, which I know is kind of difficult with the multiple crises we're currently in, but I think it's also important as a way of giving hope and showing that change is still possible. At the same time, there is obviously, when we talk about climate change, there is obviously very much the need to express the urgency to act, because it's very clear that the next years, this decade is really crucial to achieve the transformation that we need to see. So it's not about putting plasters here and there. It's really about how can we advance and accelerate the transformation that is needed, and the transformation that will bring many health benefits if we do it right. So with that, I'd like to thank you and give it back to you, Aina.
Thanks, Annie. Fantastic. Thank you very much. This gave us a little better overview of the policy aspect and how can we influence that. And I'm happy to announce that James managed to make it. So we're going to hear him now presenting some of his work, actually his book, Atlas of the Invisible, which I would highly recommend to everyone in the room to read. Which is basically an amazing book on how can we make better maps that are more compelling and then can actually, send the message out there. And we've been talking about before in the first presentation how important maps are to gather information and share that information. So I'm really happy to have James here. He's a professor at the Department of Geography at UCL in London. So James, feel free to share your screen. And you have about 12 minutes because we would like to have a panel discussion at the end. So yeah, 10 minutes-ish.
Great, thank you for that. And apologies everyone for the slight delay. One of the joys of online presenting is that you can be in a hospital I don't know if people can see, but I've got some stitches in my jaw now as a result of an accident this morning. So you can be having your jaw stitched up and then an hour later be able to give a presentation. So that's one of the few silver linings, I think, of our move to online. Anyway, enough about that. I wanted to share with you some of the process behind some of the maps that we've created for this book called Atlas of the Invisible. And so hopefully you can all see my screen. Someone tell me if you can't. But I work very closely with a designer named Oliver Uberti, and he's based in LA. And between us, we kind of create books together, and we each have a our relationship is extremely collaborative. So we do work very closely together at every stage when we create the graphics, and I'll show examples of that. But this is kind of an example of how we might break things into different roles, if you like, from the original idea that we may have through to the final design of a graphic. So this is a graphic showing turbulence and how turbulence at 34,000 feet is likely to increase as the atmosphere becomes more unstable due to the warming atmosphere. And in the top left is kind of what was published in the scientific paper accompanying this. So it's kind of a map that shows sort of darker reds for greater increases in turbulence and so on. And that's how most sort of scientific publications, data is presented. What Oliver and I like to do is work together to find ways of presenting the same data, but in slightly more engaging and exciting ways for a more general audience. And so what you see here is the kind of initial idea I had, but well, rather than just have it on a flat, unprojected map, why not put it on a spherical projection? And then on the final version, you can see, and I'll talk in more detail about this, how it looks very different indeed from the original, but actually the data themselves are exactly the same. And so we go through a process, and this is quite important, I think, for the way that we work. And we first think of a topic, We then think of the data that's available to map that topic. We then develop the angle, and finally we create the form. And so what each of these things mean is that, of course, the topic, many of you will be researchers and so on, and so you'll have your topic in mind about what you want to visualize. The data step comes second, because it's actually quite hard. Sometimes people, when they have a data set, they're looking for an idea, something interesting in the data, but of course you should be driven by the topic, the idea, the kind of analysis you want to do, rather than necessarily trying to pick something out of a data set. The angle is really the story that we're looking to tell from the data set. So again, it could be presenting results in an academic publication, or it could be kind of presenting to a wider audience. Angles could have a more slightly political emphasis on them if there's a particular kind of bit of campaigning you want to do, or they could be much more impartial. And then finally, once you've got those three things sorted, you then think about how it looks, and that's the form. It's not just a case of using a standard map necessarily, or even sometimes people have an idea, they say, I really want to create, an arc diagram from my data, and then they then try and make the data fit the arc diagram, and it doesn't always work that way. It's always best to have, the way that you're going to visualize it as the last thing on your kind of list. And so I showed you before that turbulence graphic, and this is it when we're thinking about some of the early ideas we had. So, turbulence is all about bumps in the atmosphere, and so if you're on a plane, you're feeling these lumps and bumps. And so we started thinking about, are there graphical forms that can help show lumps and bumps? And of course, a line like this with the bumps along it, that show where the increases are and so on, is one analogy. We try and make things more relatable to people. So by plotting the data on the sphere in this way, we put an indicative flight path across, but then we had a bit of fun by using kind of emojis to show how you're more likely to feel sick flying where the areas were of the highest increases of turbulence come in. So straight away, this is again a slightly more relatable way of presenting the data. And so this actually is the final graphic. It shows not just New York to London, but also a number of other quite popular flight routes. And then those lines I showed you before are what we've showed here. So we've got the kind of the turbulence as it is now, and then the greens represent the predicted turbulence after 2050. Another example of some data we took was trying to come up with a way of visualizing the flow of ice on the Greenland ice sheet. So this is satellite-derived imagery showing the speed that the ice is moving off the top of the ice sheet and then kind of out towards the glaciers in the outlets, in the valleys towards the ocean. And this is kind of a story that's a factual thing about how fast the ice is going, but also, the ice loss and so on that results from the acceleration that is being seen. And so rather than present the data as kind of a grid, what we did was we came up with a way of representing the data as a flow. And then we thought very carefully about the extra layers of information that people need to make sense of this kind of data set. So we've put the hillshade here for where the bare rock is. And then actually we created a slightly kind of shaded area to represent the extent of the ice sheet itself. And then we had the movement vectors on top of that. And so we spent some time thinking about how we might change color along each of these lines to represent the speed. And so the final map that we created from this is actually quite simple. There's no, in a sense that there's no additional labeling that we've put on here. There's not multiple layers of actual data. it's actually one that kind of, I think, speaks for itself quite clearly. You know, we're showing the flow of ice. It's much more dynamic than the previous original version that was kind of published in a scientific article. And then accompanying that, we added some captions, but also the decline in mass balance across Greenland, as well as a bit of context showing the actual size of Greenland as compared to the United States, because thanks to the Mercator map projection that we often see on things like Google Maps, people think Greenland is really giant, and actually it's not. It's big, but it's not as big as it appears on a Google map. So having a bit of that context is quite helpful for people if they haven't seen a map of Greenland before on its own. The final example I wanted to share is really an example of how data cleaning is actually quite an important part of the process. And again, this is something that I think gets lost sometimes, particularly when we're trying to do academic publications. We want to put absolutely everything we've got in a figure, in a graphic. And the story itself can sometimes get a bit lost amongst that. And there's no reason why we can't just show a subset of the data for people who read the article to kind of get their heads around. And then, of course, you could show the full data set in appendix or elsewhere. So this is flights data. It's collected by ADS-B receivers, and this is kind of how it comes as a raw data set. So you can kind of make out North America, Europe, parts of Asia, and you can see that there's all kinds of problems with it. There's no real data over the oceans. Africa's missing because there's no receivers there, and so we're already quite limited in the data set. So then I cleaned it up, so I took out all those messy lines, and you get a map that looks a bit like this, and you can see where the key areas of data are, and you can then see where you can focus on most confidently. So in this case, it's Europe and North America are the two areas that we have the best data sets for. So we had our topic, which was flights. We had our data, which is this. Then we started trying to think about the angle we wanted to take. So how are we going to visualize this? What angle are we going to take? And one idea was to look at the elevation of the planes, and so lower planes in yellow, higher planes in darker colors, so you can see the airports. But this wasn't kind of working for us. We thought, well, actually what we really just want to show is how busy the skies are and how congested they've become. And so you don't need to add colors for that. You can actually show it in black and white. So this is the flight trajectories over Europe. And then as soon as we showed that, we instantly had the form, which was the idea that this was like carbon. These are streaks of carbon. We're used to seeing planes as, showing a white contrail, but these dark contrails of just 1 week of flights are what you get here.
James, one more minute.
And so this is actually our final version of that data set. We've added a slight texture to make it look a lot sketchier, as if it was etched in carbon pencil. And we've added a kind of the headline and various other bits there. And what's so interesting about this graphic is we were under pressure all the time to show something interesting, a fresh perspective, something people hadn't seen before. And so we felt that we needed to do a lot of data analysis and processing in order to do that. But in fact, this is actually one of the most simple graphics we created, in the sense that it was just, the black lines on the map. And it's become one of the kind of most popular ones from the book, just because that image combined with that title of carbon overhead is such a compelling one. So I wanted to leave it there. I want to say thanks everyone for your attention. If you go to atlasoftheinvisible.com, there's actually a link to some educational materials there. That actually might be of some use and help to many of you. Either it's designed more for kind of high school level, but actually there's some discussion there about how the maps were created, and some additional comments and things there that you might find helpful if you're interested in finding out more. So thanks again, everyone, and I'll be more than happy to take questions at the end.
Thank you so much. And I'm really glad you were able to make it. I hope that stitches are fine. We really appreciate your effort to make it. So with that, we finish the presentations and we open now the floor for questions. So please, everyone who have questions, put them on the chat, and me and Anna will keep picking some of them and putting them for discussion. So from the questions that I've been gathering throughout the presentations, I think there is sort of two main topics of discussion. One is like, how do we actually go from having a research project and making it to a compelling story, which you guys touch upon in your presentations, but there's some more specific questions. And the other one is, how do we actually make these stories have the change or the effect that we were willing them to have, and how we can evaluate whether we achieve that or not. So things like, what are our target audience, etc. So I know that Aina has to leave early, so I'm gonna start with you. So one question that we had is that sometimes it feels, from Matilda Pascal, that sometimes it feels that this communication, especially when it comes to policy, it's a bit unidirectional and it's not sufficient, and that we would need more actual discussions face-to-face, more networking, and actually accessing these higher spheres. What do you think about it? Do you think there's other ways of reaching to this audience, more like policymaking, regulation, etc.? Or
Thank you. Yeah, I think there is not the if you want the one size fits all, or the one recipe for success and for impact. That'll also be that'll always be a challenge. And I mean, I couldn't go into details from what I presented. This was really the basics, but of course this then gets to be more elaborate when thinking about the policy process. So kind of really analyzing who are the people we need to talk to at the certain stages of the policy process. For example, it's first it's going to be in the ministry or in the European Commission, then it's going to go to the European Parliament, then it'll go to ministers, so thinking about that, then who of those are really our allies, who of those are the ones, that'll be more resisting. And I think one way and one need to to have a better impact is for us, as I said before, is for us to team up and to really exchange and see also how we can, for example, have joint meetings with policymakers, with the scientists, and then with the non-governmental health organizations, or organize dedicated hearings where the scientists come and present. The media plays a key role in what was initially presented in terms of sharing the evidence that is out there, and then scientists providing quotes. I think there are many avenues, and it's just that let's try them all and then see how we can strengthen the visibility. With the pandemic, we were constrained in terms of the access that we had. But I mean, there is still social media, and all of these policymakers, they are on social media, and they do recognize things. We see this when we get retweets, for example, or when we get likes. So it's not as as they're in their room and they're not listening to what's out there, or they're also listening to the constituents. So it's about identifying these, if you want, landing points or starting points, and then taking it from there. Thank you.
And following up on that, do you think that sometimes the research that we do, it's too focused on advancing our knowledge, but not necessarily in a way that it's practical for change? And that, I guess, it applies to policymaking, but also like for a person in the street, if they read this paper, does these actually give them any information that can be used in their day-to-day life or in policymaking to change a policy? Or are we just like creating more and more information that just sort of satisfy the scientific craving of understanding better a process, but not necessarily giving the tools should we change the type of research that we're doing to something more practical? Or
that's a hard question for me, and I think that's also not something for me to decide, because I think there very much needs to be research for research's sake and just for furthering our knowledge. And I mean, many citizens, many people are also more and more participating in what's called citizen science and bringing forward knowledge. I think it's the thing is really then to build alliances and have these exchanges to see what is most relevant for people, and how can we help further that. And discussions among the scientists are very different, and you have your own languages, and that's all important to have. And then there are the policy discussions, and then there are the public discussions. So it's also being aware that certain translations as part of the process need to happen, and then see who are, if you want, the mediators and the communicators to ensure that translation.
Great. And then another question that's for all the speakers from Ricky. How do you validate that your media or messaging actually lands with the target audience? Do you run surveys or interviews to see if the key ideas are absorbed as they were intended, or is it driven by engagement metrics on digital platforms? And this is for all of the speakers. So.
I can see Tom's also muted. So I have, I think, 2 points on this, and maybe Tom can elaborate on them if I've missed anything, which is that Carbon Brief, yes, does run annual surveys. And, I'm going to leave Tom to elaborate on that more, because I know he deals with that side more. But the other side is that we do have social media and engagement metrics. So on social media, we can tell when things get a lot of engagement, retweets, likes, comments, etc. And we do try to respond to people's comments. So often people will say things like, well, this is interesting, but have you thought about this other aspect of it? Or this is really interesting, but maybe there's a slight inaccuracy here. And it is stuff that we try to take on board and sort of comment on. And then engagement metrics as well. You can sort of see which pieces get the hits, which pieces don't, which pieces people read all the way through to the end of, and which pieces don't, which is a pretty good way of telling when our messaging is landing and when it's not.
Mm-hmm. Just on metrics, I mean, it's also not always just about the the volume of engagement, but we often consider the particular key influencers, say on social media, who have seen our content and have shared it. So whether that's a government minister who's picked up on some data analysis that we've done, or whether that's Greta Thunberg, who has seen a visualization that we've produced. We know once they share that content, we see a huge feedback response from particular demographics. So we know the kind of, you can tell to some respect, the kind of audiences that you're reaching with that content. So it's not always just that it's reaching, into the thousands. It's also dependent on those particular people on those platforms. And just on the reader survey, so for I think like the past 5 years or so, Carbon Brief has sent out an annual survey, which gets a few thousand respondents each year, and there's a range of questions in there. We try to keep it the same each year so that we can do sort of cross-year analysis, but generally it's things asking like what type of content you want to see us cover, and also the format of that content. Obviously, there's an uptick in people wanting different ways of consuming our content, so through podcasts and video interviews, things like that. But generally, as you see, the kind of where the conversation is going in climate policy is then reflected in what people want to see us cover.
Anything else to add, James or Anna, on that respect?
Well, so for me, I think it's interesting. I mean, we have a very clear metric, which is how many people buy the book on one level. So how many people have we persuaded to spend money on a copy of the book? But equally, these things come in strange strange ways. So it may be certainly a couple of articles, for example, I've done for The Conversation, you know, the one that seemed to have the lowest number of hits in terms of reads has actually probably had the biggest impact in terms of people reaching out to me to do additional talks and to talk to them about different things and things like that. So there's no exact science to this, but I would say, you know, as an academic, as well as sort of doing publishing books, I think putting all your eggs in one basket is always a bad move, and actually getting too hung up on one set of metrics is not useful, actually, because there's a real difference in the quality of engagement, and it only takes kind of one thing to happen to lead to another thing, and that may be that it's on something that doesn't initially seem to have the traction that another article or something may have.
Fantastic. And another question unrelated to the target audience, but this one is for James. So what are your thoughts on the fact that we often use Mercator map projections, which are, do you think they're acceptable and useful for plotting global data, as they are Eurocentric, and obviously they don't represent accurately how the world is distributed, but is the one that most people is familiar with?
Yeah, thanks for that. So the Mercator projection isn't in itself Eurocentric. It's just the way that people use it. They tend to put the UK at the centre because that's where the Greenwich Meridian line is. If you go to China or North America even, you'll see it in different centre points. It's pretty poor at pretty much everything that we might want to do with it in terms of representing data. So because it distorts the poles so much, it makes, you know, certain areas massive compared to more equatorial regions. So if we're trying to show where people live and things like that, it doesn't help with that. And then the distortion of the area can cause all kinds of problems around the perception of size and all that kind of thing. And it does make a huge difference. I gave a talk to a UK conference a few weeks ago that was aimed primarily at teachers, and they spend a lot of time actually, you know, doing map projections and thinking about what the Mercator means. So I would always encourage you to use a different projection if you can, an equal area one or something similar. But also it's slightly dependent on the data you have as well, and if, you know, things like that. So if you're using any gridded data, but definitely moving beyond the Mercator is something that we can all strive to do, I think.
Great, thank you. And then I have a couple more questions on more practical stuff. So Anna asks, is there any user-friendly software that scientists could use or that you could recommend for us to use to make more engaging plots without, you know, requiring a lot of added training, maybe more multimedia visualizations, etc.?
Yeah, I can speak to that. So the examples that we showed were working with D3, which has quite a steep learning curve if you haven't coded before, but our day-to-day chart library is working with a JavaScript library called HiCharts, which is free to use. So if you're confident working in sort of HTML and JavaScript, then you can make interactive charts through that. But there are alternatives out there where you can just kind of plug in the data, and you know, then it's sort of what you see is what you get. So there's Data Wrapper and Flourish. They're two good frees. You know, they have free tiers that you can use to visualize your data in many different ways. And then the maps that we showed, both of those were produced with Mapbox. Again, there's a free tier. You know, you can have quite a few views, thousands of views before you start paying a subscription fee. But and yeah, that again, there's a kind of studio sort of strand to that, where you can just you can style the map as you want it to look, and plug in your data from whatever sort of data source or type that it is, and it does a pretty good job at being able to sort of read through the data, and you can sort of visually plot what you want and then export it from there. And yeah, that's it. That's if you want to produce a map that has interactive features, things like that for the user.
Thank you. James, do you have any suggestion on mapping maybe?
I think there's a lot of resources and training out there now for some quite good open source tools. So I use software like R, but also QGIS is a kind of a mapping software and things like that. There's also, if any of you have licenses for ArcGIS Online, that actually has quite a lot of powerful tools in it now. So, even compared to just a few years ago, there's a lot out there. So I would encourage you to kind of start off with what you know, and then start Googling around, how to do whatever with this piece of software or something like that, and take it from there. And that is helpful. I mean, the other one is, I know a lot of people use Tableau, which is quite good as well. So plenty of options. It's just kind of sticking to the ones that you'd be most comfortable with.
Great. And I think we're reaching the end of the session. I don't see any more questions on the chat. So just to wrap up, we have a room mainly full of scientists. So I just wanted to get from all of you a final sort of message, takeaway home on how you would encourage us to maybe better communicate our research, or things that you think we should be thinking of. So I don't know. We could go around the screen as I have you. So Tom, you're up first.
So I think just from a multimedia perspective, I mean, Ayesha can probably speak to this a lot more, but the kind of charts and data that are published in these papers, I think it's often useful just to think of the one key element or the one key headline that we can pull out of that data, strip it right back and make it very simple. I think often, a more simple chart can have much bigger impact than overloading it.
Aina?
My message would be, don't hesitate to engage in the communication with the public and with policymakers. And yes, warm invitation to work with HEAL and others on, exchanging how that is best done and how it's made most policy relevant. And I just wanted to invite you all actually to continue the conversation. 18th May will be Climate and Health Day as part of the European Public Health Week. And I put a link in the chat, and it would be great to see some of you again and be part of that exchange, because it's very clear that we need to have the science voices in the policy and public debates, because it's really urgent that we see greater climate ambition. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We'll make sure to join. James?
Yeah, so I think having the courage to do some of the communication is quite important, but not necessarily easy. So I know that particularly around things like climate, you can get a lot of flack from people, and it comes from both directions. It comes from academics who want to say what you've done is wrong, and then people who are skeptics. And so I would encourage you just to try and push past that, because it's, it happens to everyone, and the difference is you're willing to communicate, and the people that generally critique you are not so willing to communicate. They're happy to complain. So, bear that in mind and stick at it. And then I would also definitely say, collaborate if you can with people who are used to doing this. So like media organizations like Climate Brief and others who are on the whole pretty trustworthy, in terms of like, if you give them a heads up on something that's coming out or something you're working on, then actually they generally can help you come up with if they think it's interesting, they can actually come up with a plan to help you communicate it through their channels. And it means that it all happens at once. When your paper comes out, you've got some coverage and things like that. So that's something I've found quite productive myself, and definitely something I'd encourage you you to do, but it can take a little bit of time to get used to some of the feedback you might get putting stuff out publicly, but you just need to kind of push on with it.
That's a great advice. Thank you so much, James. And finally, Ayesha.
So mine is pretty straightforward. It's the acronym that I use on a daily basis every time I get stuck. Keep it simple, stupid. So I have a science background. The majority of my friends are scientists from university. I talk to scientists on a daily basis. I love you guys. But a lot of the detail that you think is important, I promise you is not. You've got to be really, really brutal with yourself and think, does this little detail actually add to my story? And if it doesn't, you cut it. Like, that's a lot of my job as a journalist, is kind of going through the paper or the transcript that the interview I've done with the scientists and going, yep, that's interesting to me as to a scientist, but to a general public audience, scrap it, not important. Just cut. If you're unsure, just keep it simple. Think of who your audience is and what they really want to know.
Great. These are all amazing pieces of advice, and I'm sure it's going to help everyone in the room, hopefully, to be better at communicating science. So with that, I want to thank all the speakers for joining us today for a great discussion and amazing presentations. If you want us to share your presentations with the audience, I'll be happy to do it. Just email it to me, and then I'll make sure to share it with everyone. And for the audience, thanks for joining us today. Hope this was helpful, and see you around. Anna, do you have anything else to say?
No, thanks a lot to all the speakers, and as well to you.